developers. I'm Adinda and I'm always happy to just interview all those talented indie developers all around the world. This time we're going to talk about an Australian game developer who went, well, I think he went wild. He made this game in 7 years and he used the artwork style of Monet. And so I first jump in, of course, to ask him if he knew or already know about the game that I already interviewed before with Thomas Waterzooi, who used Mondrian. So I'm really excited for this interview at all, and also to find out something about the Australian game industry, because I have no clue, and I'm just very curious how this success piece became such a success. So without further ado, let's tune in and find out. I also interviewed Thomas Waterzooi about Piet Mondrian. Have you ever heard about that game? Because this is also a game about an artist, so I was wondering do you know something about that game?
Yes, I've talked to him on Twitter. He reached out when I was launching the game. I think later on we're going to try and do a little game about artists package or bundle or something on Steam one day.
That's so cool! Nice! And I have them both. Yes. Yes, because of course everyone is surprised that you were like, well, I take Monet's, not Mondrian, Monet's paintings and going to full wild to create something out of it. Why did you pick Monet, and what was the start of everything?
So it never started about Monet. That's the weird thing about someone. I never decided to go I'm going to make a game about Monet because I love his art and et cetera, et cetera. So originally the game was set inside an eyeball, and so I had this idea of a game set on an iris, and that you would start on the edge of the eye on the white section, and then you move into the colored section of the eye and towards the pupil as the kind of heading for the main kind of big bad guy at the end, which would be this kind of big pit, scary kind of darkness towards the end of it. And if I set it over someone's life, that would too become a general metaphor for their life. You head through the colored section and towards this dark pit of, death or something. And so there was this kind of mentality early on that I was looking for someone's life that I could base this on. And so set inside an eyeball, I was looking around for people that would kind of fit that mentality. And originally I had a game that was fictional, or someone that was fictional, a person that I could write. At the time, this is an idea I had when I was in my 20s, mid-early 20s. So it didn't feel right writing a story about someone and their whole life when I had only lived hopefully a quarter of my life. So I had this idea of looking around for someone that was kind of a story that I could tell, a biography. So I went to art school for uni. I went to Bachelor of Creative Arts, and I studied painting, and I majored in painting. And I remembered I quite loved Monet back in the day, Claude Monet. It was looking around for someone. I remembered Claude Monet, and he had cataracts as an old man, essentially. And so that kind of started to tie in these levels. And I like to look at it as an idea of layering. So at first I had this game about an idea of a game set in an eye, on an iris, and then a game set over someone's life. And then Claude Monet had cataracts, so that could create kind of bring his story into the world of the game as well. And then, add another element to the landscape as well, the kind of end game of a castle in a cataract. And then I realized, I could paint it as well and have another layer where if I styled the game like Monet, then I could kind of incorporate the style into the very essence of what the game was about and the story of the game. A way of neatly tying this thing in. But yeah, like I said earlier, I never started the game with let's make a game about Monet. It was let's make a game in an eye. And then I added these elaborate layers on top of that to get to the Monet, essentially.
Okay, yeah, because there was I don't know if it was chapter 3 or something. It was a weird thing, it was kind of a monster, and I was in my Let's Play, and I was I don't want the monster to get me, so I was walking, but then if you walk too fast, then you kind of die. I guess that was to push you to maybe you need to go into the monster, but there was a moment that I was thinking about like death and nothingness, and I thought it was really beautiful. I just like it was very philosophical. But then I was like, there was some monster that you need to go in and like having with the red balls, like I don't know, like the red thing. What was the thought about? Because I had like thoughts about that, but what was the thought by yourself?
Like with the red monster on level 3, and like all the elements in the game, really, it was an idea to have this kind of biography set about Claude Monet's life. I had the excuse, in a way, to make everything a little bit weird and unusual, because I could essentially filter real life down into the world that you exist in, that the player exists in, inside the eye, and have it as a different kind of landscape and different environment that is like half real life, as in the life that he's living outside, and then half, maybe not half, because there's it's mostly his life, a lot of, the way that the eye works, like all this like little nitty-gritty science stuff. And then the bit in between that I loved is this like surreal landscape that is like nowhere in between. It is a little bit imagination and a little bit kind of real life. And so that was the bit that I wanted to play with the most, and have these kind of elements in the game that were like different than everything and anything. So you had to kind of react and drop all your expectations and react with the way the game is working.
True that.
And so and then the level 3, that big monster is loosely representative when in his early 20s Claude Monet contracted typhoid and it almost killed him. So I had this idea of, what if the typhoid was this not only like a big virus thing that's inside the eye that you have to work out and defeat, but it's also like a metaphor for like this big element, this big monster that was attacking him, and in the dark and in the quiet, and he was kind of having to battle with this thing. So yeah, like a lot of the game, it was a metaphor for what was happening with his life. And so that was just a loose kind of abstract way of being able to bring that, what was happening in his life, into the game in this kind of fun way, rather than it being directly typhoid. Like, it's very abstract and loose.
Yeah, it is, because you say battling, but I felt that I needed to work together with it. But yeah, that's maybe my fault. So that's interesting. Yeah, because like there are like kind of 12 kind of works that you choose or something from Monet itself. Like, what is like the order? Is it like oh, that word is terrible.
Chronological.
Chronological order, yes.
Yes, chronological. So there's 12 levels of the game, and they basically follow sections of his life. And so early on, I kind of, once I decided I would make a game about Monet, I kind of went through his life, and I realized how well his life kind of was grouped together in these kind of chapters. And so there was his early life, and then it was his teen life, and then we have this moment of the typhoid, and then there's these sectional parts of his life that kind of group together. And so each one of those kind of is lumped together as in his life, and then all of his works are kind of filtered through, and they too are chronological through the story as well, and match up with elements of his life, and even have to do with some bigger stages. Like stage 5, for example, you're pushing around a giant ball, which at the end is part of the way the whole, it's summing up the whole level.
What was? Yeah, that's exactly. What was behind that ball? So, please tell me, like, what was it? What was it?
That's one of his most famous paintings, or at least one of his earlier famous paintings. And Claude Monet, with a group of other people, were the Impressionists. Yes. And those Impressionists were a group of people that started in Paris around that time, and they were hanging out together, and they were kind of upset with the way that the art was being presented in Paris. And at the time, it was very controlled by these kind of elite people. At the time, they were a little bit like punk rock. They decided to go and do their own thing, and like decide to make their own gallery and make their own art exhibition, which was very unusual at the time. And they put up all their works that they wanted to show, and one of which was Impression Sunrise, which is the artwork at the end of level 5. And that was a kind of like this big moment for Monet and his peers, because they showed all the work that they wanted to show, which was this kind of, we call it now impressionistic, but there was no term for that. It was just kind of like what looked to people, and critics at the time called it unfinished and whatnot, and kind of like unpolished kind of work. And they actually named these people impressionists after that artwork, Impressions Sunrise, because Monet was describing impressions of something. He was describing the impression of the sunrise, and painting the impression of the sunrise, not the sunrise itself. So that's why he called it. And then critics then called them impressionists. And then they used that term to describe themselves. And then that became the whole movement in artwork, which is, in my eyes, the kind of start of abstraction and start of this big, long movement into modernism, what we're still bouncing off now. And so it went from realism to like impressionist, which is a bit more splashy, a bit more colors, and a big moment like that is a big moment in someone's life and a big moment in Monet's life. And so I wanted to make a whole level based around that. So you start with pushing around this giant ball, which you've been reacting with smaller balls through the game. And this whole level, you're basically pushing around this giant orange ball. And at the end, it is the sun of the sunrise. And so it's this kind of
that's
moment.
true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But it was meant to be in those levels also kind of the sun in a way, or it was just like pushing it forward. Like what was the thought about it? Because it kind of felt, of course, in the painting, but like it was like along with me for so long. So would I have known like that it was the sun for so long, or was it like it's merged into a sun? Like what was the idea behind that?
The whole game doesn't have any text or any narration to it. It's just you experiencing this kind of game. I don't think anyone's going to walk away from the Master's Pupil and know a whole lot more about Claude Monet. They're not going to learn when he died, when he lived, when he was, nothing about him. I was never intended it to be about him. I never intended the game to be a factual information session about Claude Monet. But I think what I've tried to do is create an interesting puzzle game. That's fundamentally what the game is about. It's about interesting puzzles. And I tried to make them loosely about making art. And so I think there's a lot of parallels between puzzle making and art making. You have to deal with your own frustration in a way that is like, because when you make an artwork, it doesn't always look great. So you have to try and make it look great, and you have to frustratingly work out the puzzle of what makes this artwork work. That's kind of a parallel that I want to use, as well as there's a lot of other stuff about moving objects around in space, as well as color theory, just broad things that to do with art making.
Yeah, there was a lot about color theory in itself. I mean, it's basically the puzzles with the colors,
Yeah, and so, I tried to make all these kind of parallels. It's not meant to be specific and descriptive, like you're not supposed to go, here's the metaphor that's laid out. But in my mind, it was always about, he dealt with these ideas and these concepts for such a long time that he was pushing this giant ball along and rolling it into place at the very end. And so a lot of this stuff is kind of like these loose metaphors and abstract levels that have to do loosely with his life, nothing as specific and direct.
Yeah, I get that, because I felt also there were a lot of like examples. I don't know, like the last levels, it felt like Mario in the High Castle. It's like I can just hear the tune of Mario in itself. I was like, okay, we're going to the big boss.
Definitely,
yeah. So that was kind of an interesting experience. But yeah, then like the paintings, but I know you painted more works, right? So how did you decide which paintings did you pick for your game? Or was it like more like, this one I like, or like, or did you
a little bit of that, a little bit of like, I like this one, and I'll put that in. And a lot was kind of what I had access to as well. So it was like trying to find large enough images. Like there was just a technical aspect of like which kind of artworks. But then I also went through his work and made sure that I was using his most prominent. It's not necessarily his most famous, because that's kind of alludes to something else. It was like the big artworks in his life that were a change in the way he painted, or a change in the way he styled something, like Impressions Sunrise. That's a big one. And then, there's Woman in a Parasol, which is like kind of a famous artwork with, it's kind of on a hill and you're looking up at a woman with a parasol, and she's got this big dress. And so that's when he started to really, really think about light and the way light reacted with fabrics and landscapes and that kind of thing. So there was all these elements, there's all these like key artworks that I wanted to kind of talk about or like have in the game and be kind of features of the game, because they were big parts of his life. And so they kind of, all those elements seem to kind of lock together and have all these like, again, that layering effect I was talking about earlier. It's if those artworks could be A, interesting artworks in themselves, but also B, be integrated with the story and integrated with the game, then they were the kinds of ones I focused on and tried to bring into the game as much as possible. You have to have the Japanese bridge and the water lilies and the haystacks. It's like the big ones that people understand and know, because a lot of people that have played the game that don't know Monet, but then the people who do know Monet will only likely know one or two of his paintings. And so I have to kind of get them in the game and then probably in the trailer as well. So you can try and get some people involved.
Well, so those paintings were in canonical order, right? And they were mostly about pushing something into a painting.
Pieces of the paintings become puzzle pieces, like quite literally in the puzzle that you deal with, and then you have to push them into place. And so a lot of it had to do with like trying to connect them, and have them separated, as well as the kind of other mechanics of the color theory that we talked about, but also physics and then it becomes about unlocking different colors and using different kind of in these kind of crystal walls that you kind of unlock as well.
Yeah, I know, and I also, this may be not nice. Yeah, I noticed quite a lot of bugs. I encountered 3 bugs, kind of game-breaking bugs. Like, was that because you were doing, like, because you say that you were going from art school, right? So you started with using, I guess you made it in Unity at that time? Is that correct? Yeah. So is that because you made it first time a game, or did you make a game before? Because I felt like, some things like with physics, I don't know, that felt like, this is made by someone who's more into art than into game development. Is that right?
Yeah, you're dead right. That is spot on. Because this is my first game, and I made a lot of choices early on that kind of backfired in a lot of ways, because it's my first game. I didn't know how to code before this. I learned to code while I was building this game. And it took me 7 years to make this game. So it was a long process of like learning how to code and learning how to do this. And I made a lot of choices early on, like incorporating real physics or, physics engine into the game, Unity's physics, and then having a very linear puzzle-based game. Yeah, there was a lot of bugs that came out of that. And I tested very, very heavily, and there's been a lot of patches since it came out. But those two things don't mesh very well, basically, because early coder, physics, and linear puzzles, a great combination to create soft locks, where someone can get themselves in a position if they try really hard.
I do that. That's my specialty, yes.
Yes, and so I find there's especially a lot of early players, and so that was this really like alarming moment for me where I was like, I had a lot of people jump on early on that were really into the way games work, because they were like journalists or they were like, what have you, podcasters. I was kind of worried early on that I had made this really buggy game. But what I realized is there's so many people out there that in a way like to break the game and like to try and find these like awkward moments. Thankfully, a lot of them have been fixed, and then a lot of them have been kind of flagged, and we've been able to fix a lot of them. But yes, early on there was quite a lot of bugs and a lot of kind of like awkward moments because of physics and soft locking that just locks people into a position. And so never doing that again, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very good in finding bugs, so that's my specialty, especially when doing live streams. You can restart the game, like, was that because to fix this issue, or was there like another? Yeah,
I never wanted to, the reset function just resets you to the start of every puzzle. And then occasionally there's a longer puzzles that when you restart, you kind of go back, you have to do a longer puzzle again. I'd never wanted to punish people. I've never liked repetition in games. And I especially don't like repetition that is enforced by you dying. Dark Souls, I've always liked the concept of those games, but the repetition that you have to go through to replay and replay and replay until you've rope learnt a set of maneuvers, I never found that very interesting. I like the idea of puzzles You don't have to rope learn why they work. That moment of eureka, that aha moment that you get when you finish a puzzle, that's what I wanted to recreate. And that's what I wanted to make a game around. Not the idea of punishing someone because they died. I tried to make it as much as possible that you never died in the game and that you could reset very easily. But you still have to make moments where you do die, and you have to make moments where the character died. But I never wanted to make that this awful moment. And when playtesting, you know, I'd take it to like an Australian kind of playtest or event. And so I would have various people playing it. And whenever I got older people playing it, you know, anywhere from like mid-20s or above, whenever they died, they would be like, oh no, I died. Isn't that bad? And I'd be like, it's fine, you're just there. And they're like, oh, okay, all right, cool. And then they just run like they seemed to worry about it. And then kids, they'd die repeatedly over and over again and not blink. They would just be like playing the game as per usual and just completely fine with it.
They played a lot of Super Meat Boy when they were young.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, I never wanted the game to be punishing, and I never wanted it to be. So yeah, I just made sure, and it was a good way of getting around soft lock scenarios, because if someone does get stuck, they can just reset it and it starts again. You know, again, I didn't want it to be a punish, but I just wanted it to be a simple playthrough and be about the puzzles, not about rope learning sequences or working out giant sequences at a time. You know, it was always about kind of step-by-step puzzles.
Yeah, so you focus more on the eureka part of puzzles and not on the hero of games, basically, like skill-based. Yeah,
exactly. And that's why, you know, the game, there's no time-based skill. You don't have to rush anything to try and defeat something with a timer. There's not many hard moments of platforming, you know, of jumping between things. There's some early stuff, you know, that teaches you some of the mechanics of the game, but basically there is only jump and left and right. Dealing with the physics of the game can be a bit tricky, and so there's some tutorial kind of lessons up front. But otherwise, I just avoided everything about, either timed or, you know, twitchy platforming, because I'm not a big fan of those games. I'm not a big fan of having to do that in games. And so when I wanted to make, like you said, a eureka-based puzzle game, there was a moment of decision I had to make early on that was like, how do I make this game playable by everyone so they can just get to those moments and not have to be kind of frustrated with their physical skills, essentially.
Yeah, talking about frustration, like what was like the biggest frustration while making this game?
Yes, there's a lot of frustrations, and especially learning how to code, because I came from a background of art, which is very one-to-one. You know, put some paint on a page, is directly one-to-one with what you're doing. But coding is this language that you deal with something over here, and then right over there, something else changes, and something else is dynamic in time or in space or in, you know, maths or whatever. So getting my head around that kind of abstraction, that's frustrating. That was very frustrating. And then, you know, butting up against coding problems and bugs and that kind of thing is very frustrating, obviously. But, you know, I spent so long on the game that for me, it was always about the time that I spent on it. So even though there's frustrating elements of game design and game development, there was always something fun because it was something that I wanted to be doing. It was a creative pursuit. So that was all part and parcel of making a game and the puzzle of making a game in itself. That's what I wanted to be doing. I wanted to be making a game. So whatever challenges it had, that was just part of the process for me.
So if I ask you in like, okay, so because 7 years, like the motivation going up and down, like how did you keep motivated, and did you have some techniques for that? Or did you find out some new techniques? Well,
yes, I think it was constantly working out new techniques to stay motivated, definitely. But for me, again, it always came down to that work idea that I wanted to be doing a big and large creative pursuit. I wanted to be kind of chipping away at the giant piece of marble. For me, it was always that concept of, if you were to climb a mountain, it's always one step at a time. Because even though I was doing this big undertaking and painting, you know, thousands of hours and thousands of artworks, for me, it was a matter of just doing it day by day. More than anything, it's a good way to spend my time. It's what I want to be doing. I want to be doing creative pursuits and I want to be making games. And so this was a way of doing that, essentially. The massiveness of it is the motivation in a way, because it's just more time to be spent, you know.
Was it your side hustle or was it like full-time? Like how, because full-time 7 years is really
not possible.
No, it's not possible. Okay.
No, it's not possible for indie to be able to just make a game like that. You know, I think it's not something that's talked a lot about with indie games, is like how to financially actually make the game. Because yeah, I can say 7 years and I can say, oh, it took me 7 years to make this game. That doesn't actually sum up what it took to make it and what it took, because the first 3 years weren't full time. It wasn't even part time. It was a lot of afternoons and some weekends and some weekdays that I was kind of allowing time for and building my skills up and building the ideas of the game. Over that time, I built essentially just the first level. It's a vertical slice. It's smaller than a demo because it's essentially everything that the game has to offer, but in a very small kind of stack. And I developed this kind of first section. I showed friends and family, and they really liked it, and I really liked it.
Yeah, friends and family.
Which is important, you know. Like, if I didn't like it, then I don't think I would have kept going. And then I got to this moment where I was like, this is what I want to be doing. This is what I want to be spending my time on. And so I started working part-time. I'm a freelance graphic designer as well. And I have a company that I run with a developer friend, a web developer. And I had the privilege to be able to kind of set my own hours. And at first, stopping at like 4 p.m. every day, and I would just do an hour or so of work, or an hour, and then work into the evening as well. And I was doing that for quite some time, but I realized I just wanted to be doing that every day. And so every day earlier and earlier, I would stop work, and, you know, it was 4, and then it was 3, and then it was 2, until eventually it was like, I'd stop after lunch and I would just work on the game. I found a good rhythm where I was basically working part-time on the game and then working part-time for money. And I could earn enough of a wage that I could live comfortably and still work on the game. I did that for another 3 years. And then at the end of that 3 years, I applied for a Screen Australia grant. So Screen Australia is a government body that runs in Australia, essentially funds the arts in film, TV, and then only recently started, you know, federal funding for games as well. And so I applied for that. It blew my mind when I got it, and it enabled me to go full time, as well as like hire a company to get the game to Switch and do a bunch of bug fixing. And I could pay my musician friend who did the composing for the game as well, which was lovely. And so that was this kind of process that I could go through because I got the grant. But yeah, it's 7 years, but it's not just full time, because I think if I was just paid full time and I could just make the game, it possibly would have only taken me like 3 years, maybe more, because I had to learn how to code and whatnot. But yes, it's a process that took a long time because financially it's just hard to make a game.
And it's very risky, of course.
Yes, yeah, a giant risk, because at the end of the day, I got to a certain point after I had been working part-time on it. I got to this point where all of my friends were all getting to this point where our like late 20s, early 30s were starting to make a career. They were starting to earn real money in their lives, and I was still working like part-time, working on this game, this, you know, like little hobby of mine. Yes, there was this kind of worrying element of why am I doing this for so long, and like, you know, what should I be doing more, you know. So
because I think your game kind of got a lot of attention. Like, did you push that yourself, or were you just surprised by like the attention that your game got?
I was very surprised, definitely surprised. Basically, a month before launch, 3 posts went viral on both TikTok and Instagram. The first 2 got over 1 million views each. And then the last one now is at like 8 million, 9 million views on each platform. So really big, way bigger than I had ever thought, you know, it was kind of possible for my game. And I had hired a game marketing company with the game grant, but only some of it, the grant was available. There was only a certain percentage I could use for marketing. So I could only really pay for essentially a campaign plan, essentially just the plan of what to do. I had to then go and do it all.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know, I'd been doing a post a week basically for the whole time I had been doing the game development, with some patchy moments here and there, but essentially once a week for 7 odd years. And so then when it got to the end, I was kind of instructed to ramp those up as much as I could, do 3 posts a week for a few months as I could, and then 6 weeks out, do a post every day. You know, also my brother is in social media, and he's an influencer or a content creator. He does a lot of D&D based stuff. Zach Naoum, Zach Speaks Giant, he's fantastic. Everyone should go look him up. He's been dealing with TikTok and YouTube a lot as well. And so he had a lot of tricks and a lot of advice to give me essentially. And so we came up with a bunch of posts that we could put up. And it was essentially just a matter of making a lot of noise because, as an indie developer, there's no real money to pay for ads. That's basically a lot of the way modern marketing works is you just pay a lot of people to write and talk about your game or play it online. There's always that idea as an indie is to do your own grassroots. And so I just tried to do as many things right as I could, follow as many I read a ton of viral or not viral, but social media advice. I followed the campaign brief to a T. I had a website, I had, press releases, I had a press kit online as well. And so there's all these things that I did right. Then I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to luck. If your post hits at a good time, the posts were hitting at the same time. I was talking about this long game that I had made. It took me 7 years to hand paint a game. And this is around when the big influx of when Mid-Journey started, there's a lot of AI talking as well over the last 6 months or so. So hit at a time where people were realizing, really kind of wanting to hold up a game that was with real paint and real paper and they had, something to hold on to. So it just hit at a good time and it hit at a right moment. And so that just helped. It does come down to luck. As much as you can do as much as you can and tick all the boxes, at the end of the day, it's lucky and the game found its audience because that's what you're aiming for with a very niche game. This is a linear 2D puzzle game that's about an 1800s artist. The Venn diagram of people that you want to play is this little overlap in the middle. The idea is that you can show as many people as possible, but that is super difficult. With those posts going viral, I was able to get so many eyeballs on the game and be able to have enough of that niche Venn diagram overlap to actually be interested in the game and know that it exists, which is always the difficult part in indie dev.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I hear kind of similar stories from Eric Rampen and from Adam Koning from Stacklands. But they used a lot of Twitter. Did you also use Twitter or were you Instagram, TikTok? And do you think it doesn't really matter which social media you use, but that you keep consistent? Or is that just a thought that I have?
Yeah, I was posting on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. All three. Yeah, all three as well. And it was just that the other two went viral and Twitter didn't. For me, again, it was that idea of I was making content, I was making daily content. The idea basically of might as well post to Twitter as well. Because originally I started on Instagram. After a few years, I started posting to Twitter as well because it was, why not? And then I got to a certain point where I was well, I might as well do it on TikTok because I'm doing the same content. And it was just that, Instagram and TikTok took off. The first post that went viral that hit that 1 million views was a reshare that I had done months before. The original one went well on Twitter. It got 60,000 something views, which at the time I thought was fantastic, which is fantastic by indie game standards. At the time I was great, well, that went well. It didn't go well on the other two, but oh well. And then I got to the point where I was posting every day and I had to start resharing stuff and reposting stuff. And then that one didn't go well on Twitter, but it went really well on Instagram and TikTok. So I like to look at all the social medias as these black boxes that you can't look into. There's no way of identifying what's going on in them. You just have to see what comes out and keep repeating until something works. Or there's no way of knowing. You just have to kind of stab at it and see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got a screwdriver trying to jam into the black box to try and open it. There's no way of knowing. You're just gonna keep going.
Also, I love this metaphor. Yeah, you just do it, you try, right? But it's interesting to hear that you already started with your marketing in the first kind of weeks that you started, right? Because most indie developers are I'm just making my game and oh yeah, I needed to market it. But you did it the other way around. You were I'm just going to every week I'm just going to post something. I don't know, but I'm just going to do that. Okay.
It was so long ago now. It was literally 7 years ago. But I always had in my mind the idea of grassroots marketing. And I knew, and I must have read enough Reddit posts and, blogs or something back when I started about indie development and about trying to make something, a hobby kind of starting point. So there must have been advice back then of try to establish some kind of people that know that you exist, I think, because starting from zero was always very difficult. I already had, an Instagram account, but I had a couple of hundred, maybe 300, 400 people on there that I had, because I had been posting up random design stuff or art stuff. I'm not sure. I had since kind of cleared that. I cleared that a couple of years ago now and made it more about the game, because it was just about me and my life and random stuff that I was doing, but it wasn't necessarily all about the game. I basically stopped and then started doing the game very slowly. Yeah, I don't know. It's just, I'm very thankful, but I think any advice I can give to any other indie devs, don't necessarily have to post all the time, but it's great to be able to have content that you made years when you started, like all that early content of what things looked like when you started working on them, what you were kind of developing early on, and create a library of that kind of stuff so that you can rely on that later. Because, my game, it's bad developer form. I basically built the game on top of itself. So I never had versions of it that I could go back to and reboot and start. So I just kind of reworked stuff. And so, I had no form of the game in its earlier form, but I had all these recordings of stuff that I had done for a social group, social posts. So then later on, I could kind of go back and reuse some of that stuff for posts.
Okay, yeah, that's great advice indeed. Like, it's showing your progress. I think people really like to see that, especially as you notify that mid-journey, like AI is just making something like within a few seconds, and people are like, yeah. Where's the work? Where's the work? We want to see cheers. We saw his sweat, right? I think that's maybe what people want to see. That's my thought on it. So. Yeah, and what is going to be the future? Because I hear that you are traveling a lot now, but are you thinking about new games, or do you want to continue? Is it like you're more focused on Monet, or you like, oh no, it's never going to happen again? Like, what's the future?
Yeah, well, it's definitely making another game. That was always the idea, and part of what I pitched to Screen Australia when I got the grant was to make this small game and get the capital so I can make another game, or at least make a prototype that I could then go for funding. And so that was always the idea early on. Yeah, there was always that plan. And with everything going viral and the game going much better than I ever expected it to, I have been able to get the capital now so that I can, make another game. And yes, I'm traveling. So my partner and I had always planned to go traveling, well before COVID. Those plans got pushed back, essentially until I could release the game. Now that the game was released, we're off in Europe now, and we're traveling in Mexico, and so we're doing a kind of year abroad, but working as we go. So
your partner is also working on the game, or because you say
no, she's a textile designer, so she's doing freelance design, and her name is Anthea Jacqueline. She's on Instagram too. You should go look her up. I gotta sell everyone. So we're both able to go freelance. And so we're kind of working while we're traveling. It's harder, but it's also I have this like starry-eyed romantic look at it of like, I'm in Greece now and I'm like designing a game all about like old civilizations and being able to go and see ruins and like this kind of thing. So there's this great romantic idea about it. Basically, I've started work this week after a holiday period. So, it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. But, very excited about the next game, but it's very, very early stages at the moment.
Will it be puzzle again, or like what is there something that's kind of grappling it?
Yeah, there will be some puzzle elements, but it's not going to be painted. It won't be a linear puzzle painted game. I've done too much to my wrist. My poor wrist has gone through way too much. My hand has gone through enough painting. So I'm putting down the paintbrush for this one. I've toyed with ideas of styling it a little bit painterly, but I think that's further down the track when I've kind of prototyped up a lot of the mechanics that I want to be fiddling with, because I'm now looking into like broader games with broader appeal and games that I've been playing more in the last 3-4 years. games like Valheim and Minecraft, even games that are like more procedural and more about crafting and building and playing with friends, and much more of a playable game rather than a linear experience that you can start from end to finish. So that's kind of what I'm more interested in at the moment, for sure.
Okay, that's interesting. And because you got a grant, but did you self-publish or did you find a publisher?
I tried to find a publisher. It was interesting. I think I tried to find a publisher too late in the production. So I basically finished the game and I was just polishing off things. And that's when I started trying to find a publisher. I talked to a lot of great people, and the best feedback I got was essentially like, you're already finished. There's nothing really we can work on together here. You just need to release the game, and we know nothing about it. We know nothing of the build up of the game or anything. So good luck with it, basically. And quite rightly, I knew nothing about the industry. And so that whole process of, I went to GDC last year and I was talking to people then. I learned a lot about the way the industry works. It was a lot of fact finding and a lot of like working out the way that publishing side of the industry works. Yeah, I ended up falling down on self-publishing, which was always my intention early on. I was always like, I'm going to self-publish it. And then when I realized how hard marketing was going to be, I was like, maybe I should get someone to pay this, that might be worthwhile. In a way, I am still thankful that I did self-publish it, because I'm just lucky enough for things to go viral and things to expand way bigger than I ever thought they would. So yeah, I've been able to hold on to the profits of the game because I had that luck, essentially.
It's interesting. So you went like first time to the event, and then you were like, oh, I just have now feel like how publishing, how the connections are. Like, what is your revelation about that? Because that's interesting, like the first thought about this.
Yeah, because I think originally I thought my idea was publishers were this kind of big mechanism that was about money making and about trying to milk your game for as much as they could, which it's valid for a lot of publishers. There are many publishers that do that, but there is also a lot of publishers that are really caring with the games that they work on. The offers that I got were from the harsh publishers that I didn't want to kind of just accept their money and then and accept their terms. I wanted to go with the polite, creative publishers, but they always want to deal with the game from very early on. They want to make sure that the game is being built properly and it is being built, that all stages of the game is worthwhile, that they're not just getting a game later on and promoting it at the end game. And that they can also market it for a longer time then. They can kind of develop the game both with the developer and then develop the game with a potential audience and get them excited about it. There was a lot to learn about that, and a lot to learn about what goes into a contract, for example, the ins and outs of what a contract can be. There's a few GDC talks that I went to actually this year that were very interesting, and they were very kind of informational about the way those contracts work, what they can be offering you in terms of royalties and, upfront costs and all that kind of thing. So as well as just how something like the GDC works, how you get in contact with other publishers. Because before GDC, I sent out a ton of like cold emails to people saying like, hey, I'm going to be at GDC, but like Meet to Match is an app that you can assign to and you pay money to, and then you can actually meet up with people. But that gets booked out sometimes 6 months in advance. GDC is this like, I kept on saying, once I came back, it was really interesting to see the way the sausage gets made, and it is a giant sausage. Because there's this giant industry, and seeing the way the nitty gritty of it actually plays out on the street is very different to any kind of assumptions that you can make. It's just about kind of getting there and experiencing what that's like.
Yeah, I also love to go to these events, so I totally agree. And a lot of developers told before, like that going to events like really changed a lot, right? Getting the right context, understanding it. So, and I also hear that for you, that was GDC was the first event that you went, right? So you went to for a game development.
Yeah, yes, I had been to PAX in Australia, Penny Arcade Expo down in Melbourne. I'd been there, but I hadn't displayed the game. I tried to, but I had just, again, there's so much stuff that you learn early on about what those things require. And so then, yes, I tried to get into different things, and I had showcased the game at like the Sydney Powerhouse, which was like a very small expo, but bigger and bigger things that I could get into. And I also displayed the game at stuff around the GDC as well, like all the indie little pop-up games that they have. And I went to a lot of them as well. But yeah, it was generally my first GDC, and it was my first kind of big business to business kind of, or like publisher to developer kind of conference and whatnot that I went to. So yeah, just a lot of information kind of jamming into the old noggin.
Nice. And also, like, because I had never really talked so much with Australian people in Australia with the industry. Like, could you describe the Australian game industry? Like, I don't know. I know you have kangaroos, but I mean, I guess like any development.
Yeah, look, we have a lot of kangaroos on our dev team. They're really good coders, really smart developers. And artists too. The things they can do with their tail is unreal. No. It's a very small industry. It's a very little. We don't have a giant population. We have a lot of support for the film industry. Part of what Screen Australia has done for the last 30, 40 years, basically, is to try and get a lot of Hollywood film production to come in and work in Australia. So we've got this kind of small but thriving film industry, and game industry as it was developing was kind of, pushed to the edges. We have a very large sporting community, sports is really massive in Australia. That's where it takes a lot of the attention. Whereas somewhere like New Zealand, which is an even smaller population, but they're thriving in a different areas, like Path of Exile, that's run by a New Zealand company, and they run down there, and they've gotten a lot of essentially government help to create an industry that's there. And Australia hasn't had that for quite some time. We've had various small companies develop and get larger, but then they eventually inevitably get bought out by a larger European or American company that kind of buys them out. Yeah, there's this small industry that's slowly growing, all these various kind of indie hits over the time. Hollow Knight is a Australian company as well.
Of course.
House that developed Untitled Goose Game, that was an indie breakout and stuff like this. So there are these small teams that are making quite big games, or quite popular games, still small games. The feeling is now that, and with the support now of the Australian government and the Australian, we've been getting tax breaks that have just been announced this year as well. We've gotten this giant kind of influx of interest around these kind of small games and these small companies that are starting to grow up bigger. And, the idea now is that we'll hopefully get some interest from a Ubisoft or a Rockstar or whoever to open up an office in Australia, and they can kind of start supporting a lot of the community, because right now the options that you have as a game designer or someone that wants to work in a game in Australia is to basically move overseas, make your own indie game, or try and work remotely somehow. And so there's not a lot of options. There are smaller houses, but they're very it's high demand for who wants to work there. And if you can't find a spot anywhere there, then you just move to a different industry. So you have artists or you have designers that will just go do something else because there's no opportunity. So the hope is that basically the reality is now we have tiny amounts of large companies, we have a small amount of smaller companies, and then we have a lot of passionate indie devs like myself, and then a lot of passionate designers that are coming through or developers that want to be working on games. And so we're just trying to find that opportunity. We'll see what happens in the next few years. I think it's going to be this giant booming industry very quickly, because there's a lot of support and a lot of kind of incentives being brought in. But yeah, that in itself is probably a whole different podcast. Probably there's a lot to unpack there.
Nice, that's really interesting. Yeah, if I hear it correctly, the government of Australia is also because with you got a grant, and that you're kind of hinting that there is a lot of incentive for the government to keep it pushing?
Yeah, because, we've had a lot of success with the film industry. There's been a lot of money brought into Australia. It's in a way became one of our exports, is if you can become a cultural hub or a development hub and be able to just draw business into because I think, especially for America and a lot of Europe, especially, the UK, there's this idea that Australia is we work on the other side of the world when everyone's asleep and we speak English. So there's this great, whereas it's this boon that's just sitting there ready to be used, and they can work overnight, so it's a great kind of opportunity. And so, that just brings money into Australia. So the incentive, and that a game a very small game like Hollow Knight can make millions of dollars, and then make millions of dollars in tax for the government, it's just an incentive to just create more of those opportunities.
Oh Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I haven't interviewed yet someone from Australia, so that's really cool to hear some different experiences. Okay, nice. Well, this series, of course, well, that other people starting their own studio and getting some more advices from people that kind of like, well, succeed with their indie. What would be your top advice for someone who's starting? Go to Australia or
Yeah, move to Australia. No, I think my advice for an indie dev early on. Well, I've given one of my best advice, which is just record everything that you do, do little bits of it, record parts of it, and keep it in a nice library, and start that marketing as early as you can, and kind of get up that kind of interest in the community, because the online game dev, especially indie dev community, is massive. There are so many people that are excited, that can chat to you, that can give you advice, and you can learn a lot just there. That's who your first audience is getting those people excited on like itch.io, and then on Instagram and TikTok, and be making a little group of people who are also creating games as well. But I think my second advice is try and enjoy the work, because at the end of the day, game development and design takes a very long time. There's a lot of hours that you need to do, a lot of hands on keyboard, actually doing the work. If you don't enjoy it, you're not going to enjoy the end product. Because if you set out in the indie design journey with the idea of a game that you really want to play for the sake of playing it, you're never going to experience that game like a player would. You're always going to experience it from a designer perspective. You're always going to see the flaws. You're always going to find the bugs. You're always going to be like, well, if I had just polished that section better, or made another level here or whatever. So you can't play the game like everyone else does, but you're the only one that gets to actually make the game. Like I said earlier, my greatest love when I was making this was the actual hours making it, because that was what I was more interested in. That was what I really wanted to be doing, was just sitting down and crafting the game and sculpting it, because that's what I found enjoyable. Learn to love that experience. That's my advice for indie devs. Learn to love that experience, because if you can enjoy the hours, it doesn't matter how long it takes. At least you're enjoying your time.
Oh, that's just amazing. Oh, that's really beautiful. Yes, that's that's the people, right? It's passion. It's like all indie developers that I interview say the same. It's because they had the passion to strive for it, and they enjoy the product itself.
And if you're doing it to make money, there's way better ways to make money. and there's way easier ways to make art, like learn to paint. That's way easier. Like learn to play the guitar. It's much easier than learning how to game develop. So, if you're going to choose to game develop, make sure that you really like the process, you really like the tools, and you really enjoy doing it, because there's easier ways to make money and there's easier ways to make art. So it's not about ease, that's for sure.
Awesome. Yes, I think this is a great way to close this off. Or do we have some other last words of advice that you were like, I have not shared this yet?
I don't necessarily have last advice, but I do have the plug, go and play the Master's Pupil, Follow me on social media, Twitter, TikTok, or Instagram. That's at Pat Naoum Games. That last name is a doozy. I've also got a Discord up, and we're still discussing the game, and there's going to be competitions, art competitions and whatnot later. So stay tuned. The porting company I got to do the Switch port is also going to put it on PlayStation and Xbox as well. So there's a lot of more exciting stuff to come about the Master's Pupil. And then eventually I'm going to start talking about the new game as well. So that's going to be exciting.
Cool. Yeah, because normally I like to ask what's the title or the company name or whatsoever. But your title is quite obvious that it is about Monet and but now you're going to make different games. So what is? Are you already having a new name, or your company name, or or is it Pat Games?
I don't know.
Okay, that's something to think about.
I had to make a company, I had to make a legal entity company to get the grant. And I just was like, well, I'm making this game. It's my game. I'm going to make a company, and it's Pat Naoum Games, Pty Ltd. So it's very boring. It's very it's my games. And so I don't know whether I'm going to make another company and call it something else. I don't know, like I've literally been this week been fiddling with the new game, and I don't know how long that's going to take either. So yeah, if I can get it out and just self-publish it again and just call it my name and my games, then sure. But I think I'll have to go for proper funding, proper publishing this time. And in which case, then I'll get in more people, and I should probably come up with some kind of company, but that's for a different day.
Yeah, because I hear like, so you also said, and I already thought like most likely you're going to move a bit away from solo development to more group work, if I hear this correctly.
Yeah, like like a pipe dream I always had. A dream was to have a little studio, like a small team that could work together really well and make games that way. Because solo development I love because I wasn't slowed down. I was about to say I wasn't slowed down by anyone, but it's almost the other way around. Whereas like I wasn't slowing down anyone else. Like I didn't hire someone that was really good, and then I was like holding onto their coattails as they were running off into the distance, and I had to like keep up with them. Solo development was just me doing everything by myself, and I could take as long as I liked. Generally why it took 7 years, but again, that's a different battle. Wearing all those hats takes a lot of brain power, and it takes a lot of brain power to switch back and forth. I do like collaboration. I do like dealing with other people's kind of creativity and the way they handle problems and what they come up with. And I think all the skills that I've learned now gives me opportunity to kind of the language to be able to talk to different people and different designers or developers or sound designers and that kind of thing, or artists, and be able to talk with them on a proper level rather than being a kind of newbie outsider and trying to understand what they're talking about and trying to keep up with them. Because I had come from art and I'd come from film. I didn't know the language around game design, and I'm still not amazing, but I know enough now to get into that industry. And so, yeah, with the new game, I'm happy to prototype it by myself and get the concept of the game down. But yeah, ideally, I'd be talking to publishers, and then I would be, getting a small team on. That would be ideal.
Okay, great. Okay, that's interesting. And then we are we're already excited for your next title.
Thank you.
So, yeah, that will be very interesting. Thanks so much for sharing all your knowledge with all of us here on the internet.
Thank you.
Most likely see a new title within less than 7 years, if I'm correct.
Yes. Hopefully, yes. Less than 7 years. Let's go. Yes.
That's a good counter, right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, and everyone, thanks for watching. Wow, I really love this interview. It's just a mountain of advices, and I just learned so much new things. If you also learn a lot of new things, please don't forget to give a like and subscribe. And ring the bell, because next time I'm going to interview, the maker of Tunic. So I'm also very excited for that one. So please keep tuning in and see you in the next one. Make more, enjoy more. This was Acreates. Bye bye.